wind isn't too loud. I'm back for another chapter of the Swiss Family Robinson, and I'm coming to you live from outside because it's a beautiful day, and I think it's about 80 degrees out here for March. That's a wonderful gift. So I am enjoying the sunshine and decided to read from outside today. Join me for chapter 3. The other 2 chapters are already on my channel, so catch up with those first. So the Robinson family is stranded on an island. So if you're not able to chat, that may be why. So maybe outside was not a great choice for this tree. Breakfast at an inn, we prepared to set out. My wife produced several sacks that she very cleverly made out of a piece of sailcloth, and having placed them as and let's see if this works better. Closer to the router. Okay. Hopefully this works. We'll see. I'll check in a little bit. Okay, so let me start this chapter again. We'll say a do-over. Okay, breakfast at an inn, we prepared to set out. My wife produced several sacks which she had very cleverly made out of a piece of sailcloth, and having placed them as panniers on the ass and cow, filled them with such articles that were likely to be most useful to us. Our cooking utensils, hammocks, and blankets were all carefully packed into them, and we did not forget to provide ourselves with a good store of butter, cheese, biscuits, and other articles of food. Before we finished loading the animals, my wife begged me to reserve a little corner for Franz, who could not possibly walk the whole distance, as well as room for the fowls, which she said was most important that we should take with us. I gave in to her desire and made a comfortable seat for the little fellow between the panniers of the donkey's back, and Ernest and Fritz set off in hot pursuit of the fowls and pigeons. They returned in a few minutes, minus the objects of their chase, having only succeeded in putting themselves in a bad temper. My wife had watched their vain efforts with amusement and told them that she would undertake to catch all the birds without any trouble whatsoever. All at this, they looked slightly incredulous and laughingly as if she thought she could run faster than they. Here. I did not mean to run after them at all, was her reply, but I shall adopt a much better plan, as you will be obliged to admit. Upon that, taking several handfuls of grain out of a small bag, she scattered some of them on the ground, and soon by, the whole feathered flock cackled and cooed around her. By this means she decoyed them into the tent. I shut it from the outside, thus making them fast prisoners. With wings and feet tied, we placed them in 2 hampers on each side of the donkey and covered them with a cloth, so that hidden by the heat of the sun, they may not disturb us with their cackling. All the possessions that we could not carry with us, we stored away in a tent, having secured it as carefully as possible and placed all our large casks, both full and empty, around it, and I gave the signal for departure. At the head of the procession marched Fritz, looking very important, with his gun on his shoulder and his game bag slung by his side. Directly after him came my wife, leading the cow and ass. On the latter, little Franz was seated proudly, and evidently delighted with this new form of locomotion. Now and again, however, his terror overcame him for a moment, and his mother had to hasten to the rescue, hold him firmly until he had regained his courage, and when he would tell her to go away and leave him to himself, as he was not a bit afraid. The goats, driven by Jack, formed the 3rd division of our caravan. Next came Ernest and the sheep. I myself, accompanied by Bill, formed the rear guard, while Topsy, looking most grotesque in the monkey on her back, ran here and there and everywhere as if excited by her load, sniffing and barking and constantly on the alert. As we approached the bridge, the sow, which we could not prevail on to accompany the party at first, rejoined us, but her short grunts testified that she regarded our proceedings with anything but satisfaction. The crossing of the river was effected without accident. Once arrived at the other side, however, we were beset by new difficulties. The rich pasture proved a temptation to the cattle that we were powerless to resist, and all efforts to urge them forward were a long time useless. Had it not been for the dogs who materially helped us, we should never have succeeded in gathering together our wandering flock. In order to avoid further delay of similar description, I directed our leader to take the way along the coast, as there was no pasture there to cause the animals to loiter, and besides it would be a much less troublesome road to further ourselves travel. We concluded our journey without further adventure, reaching the spot chosen by my wife for our future home. After we had halted, our primary duty was to unload the beasts of burden and turn them out to feed, first taking care to tie their forefeet close together so they may not stray away. The hens and pigeons were allowed to regain their freedom and were left to wander at their own discretion, and my wife and I sat down on the soft grass with which the soil was carpeted and took counsel together regarding the construction of our future habitation. The chief difficulty that presented itself was the formation of a staircase by which to mount our airy abode, and we were engaged in a lengthy discussion of this matter. We were disturbed by hearing 2 shots fired in succession, a short distance from us, and immediately after, Fritz's voice cried excitedly, "Hit! Hit!" In a few minutes, he made his appearance carrying by the hind legs a tiger cat, on which both his shots had taken effect, and which he held proudly up for us to examine. I'll show you a picture of that. Can you see his tiger? Let's see. Well done, Fritz, I said. You have rendered good service not only to the fowls and pigeons, amongst this rascal would have made sad havoc, but also to the cattle on whose account we should have good cause to fear its presence in our vicinity. To such robbers we must show no quarter, or the consequences to our livestock would be deplorable. What will be done with its skin? Asked Jack, as he stroked its beautiful coat admiringly. I should like to make part of it into a hunting belt in which to carry my knife and pistols, replied Fritz. As the prize is yours, your desire must certainly be gratified, and I think the tail would answer that purpose admirably, he remarked. The skin of the body and legs, which would make good cases to contain the pieces of plate which we found in the captain's cabin. I showed Fritz how to flay the tiger cat and put aside the meat for salting and storing. Meanwhile, Ernest was searching for large flat stones with which to construct a fireplace, and Franz was industriously gathering a bundle of dry sticks for a fire by which to cook our evening meal. The latter soon made his appearance, and puffing under a heavy load of branches and munching something with evident satisfaction, fancying it may be some sort of fruit of a poisonous nature, which in his ignorance he was devouring, his mother called for him to throw it down immediately. But her fears were set at rest when he held out to our inspection a few figs that he had found in one of the neighboring trees. I knew at once what they were, he said, in replying to his mother's eager questioning, for I remember the fig tree that grew in our own garden in Switzerland, and I saw that the one from which I plucked these was exactly the same. Fortunately, there's no harm done this time, Franz, I remarked. But in the future, you must be very cautious about what you put into your mouth. Many fruits which have a tempting exterior and which are even delicious to the taste contain a large amount of poison, and such it is impossible for you to recognize. By consulting the monkey, however, you will always be able to decide what is fit for eating and what is not, for its instinct enables it to distinguish between these things which are suitable for food and which are not. Hardly had I said those words when Franz ran to the monkey, which was perched on a low branch of one of the adjacent trees, and offered it some figs, with which his pockets were filled. The animal, after having sniffed and examined them on all sides, at length began to eat them, and showed appreciation of the delicacy by making all sorts of droll grimaces. Seeing that the fruit was thoroughly approved by our foretaster, the boys ran off in search of some more. The boys had not yet returned from their search after figs when supper was ready, and I was about to set out after them when I heard a startled cry. Rushing in the direction from which it proceeded, I saw a large cobra, one of the most beautiful, though most dangerous, of all reptiles, winding its way through the tangled grass. As with head erect and forked tongue extended, it approached the alarmed group. Fritz, whose presence of mind rarely forsake him, hit it with a heavy blow to the head with his gun. So well directed it was the stroke that a few minutes it lay dead at our feet. As if to avenge himself for the alarm which it had caused us, Jack advanced, imitating the superstitious conduct of the Indians, cut off its head and tail, and carried them home as a trophy. This incident increased our anxiety to take up our abode in the tree as soon as we could, but as the evening was pretty far advanced, it was impossible to have our arrangements completed before nightfall. We therefore decided to make the best possible use of our hour of daylight that remained to us and provide ourselves with shelter from the dew and insects. This we did by suspending our hammocks from the arched roots of the tree and covering the whole with sailcloth. When the preparation of our comfort and safety during the night was finished, I went down to the beach with Fritz and Ernest, where I expected to find some pieces of wood that would serve as the steps of a ladder which we had intended to construct. There was plenty of timber to be had, but the logs were all so long that it would have been so troublesome to cut the proper size that we decided to go elsewhere in search of something more suitable, and found that when cleaned and stripped of their leaves, they would form admirable ladder steps. With my axe, I cut a lot of them into lengths of 3 or 4 feet and tied them in 3 bundles, one of which each of us slung over his shoulder. Seeing at no great distance a thick bed of reeds, I directed my steps toward it as in to cut some, that I might use as hard ends to the heads of my arrows. We were approaching with that caution which past experience had taught us to use when treading on unknown ground, when Topsy rushed past us like a mad thing, and immediately a large flock of flamingos rose and flew with extreme swiftness. Fritz, who was always on his guard, had just time to level his gun and fire before they were out of range. 2 of the birds fell, one quite dead, and the other only slightly wounded in the wing. The latter made use of its long legs, which gave it the appearance of being mounted on stilts, and hurrying through the marsh and reeds, would probably have made its escape if not Bill had bounded in pursuit. The dog soon overtook it, and seizing it by one wing, held it till I came to its rescue. Fritz was wild with delight at the idea of possessing the strange creature alive, and turned his attention to examining the wounds, which he was happy to see very trifling. "It will make an attractive addition to our poultry yard when I get it tamed," he said. "Look at its splendid plumage. I never saw anything like it. But as well as being beautiful, it's also very curious. Though it has long legs like a stork, which enable it to run quickly, it's web-footed like a goose, so that makes it as much at home and at the sea as it on land." While he was finding out the many peculiarities of this strange bird, I set about cutting a number of the coveted reeds, and this done, we took up our burdens and returned to our family. Jack and Franz were delighted with the new addition to our livestock, but their feelings were not participated by their mother, who saw in the bird only another mouth to feed. On this point, I did not share her anxiety, as I felt sure our new guest would provide itself with food from the river, and I set myself to dress its wounds with an ointment compounded of butter and wine. While I was occupied with my surgical operation, the youngsters had tied several reeds together and were endeavoring to measure the height of one of the large trees. But they soon relinquished the effort and came to me to announce the impossibility of reaching even the lowest branches. I told them that I had a plan for overcoming the difficulty, which, if they had patience for a little, they would see me carrying out. First, I constructed a bow by taking a bamboo cane and drawing it into an arch with a piece of cord. Then, having pointed several reeds at one end, I garnished the other with feathers taken from the dead flamingo, and weighted the arrows thus formed by filling the hollow reed with sand. The boys were not long in finding out what I was doing, and the crowd round me shouted joyously, "A bow and arrows! Oh, Papa, for which one have you made them? Do let me have a shot." "Patience, my dear children," I said in reply. "This is not a toy, but an article with which you'll see will be very useful. If you're quiet for an instant, you will see that what I intend to do with it." Taking the end of a ball of cotton, with which my wife had supplied me, I fastened it to one of the arrows, and having unwound it, I shot the arrow so that it passed over the stoutest branch and fell on the other side, carrying the thread with it. By measuring half of the cotton, that was now easy enough to calculate the height of our proposed dwelling, and to judge what length of ladder it would be necessary to make. These preliminary steps taken, we set about construction of our flight of steps, which we found must be 40 feet long. I measured off about 100 feet of strong rope. This I divided into 2 parts and laid on the grass. I then told Fritz to saw the bamboos into lengths of 2 feet each, and aided by Ernest, I fastened these by both ends to the rope at intervals of about 12 inches. Jack completed the job by driving a stout nail through each piece of wood and into the rope, so as effectively to prevent them from shifting. We then shot the end of the rope over the branch as we had previously done and drew the ladder up without difficulty. Afterwards, we fastened the lower cord to one of the roots of the mangrove, and our stairs were ready to use. Each of the boys was anxious to be the first to test its strength, but as Jack's nimbleness was in his favor, I told him to lead the way. He instantly commenced his ascent and in a few moments had reached the first branch. Fritz was the next to mount, and taking a hammer and some nails with him, he secured the ladder so firmly to the tree that I had no hesitation in hazarding the ascent myself. Arriving safely at the top, I found that everything equaled our highest expectation, and I felt sure that at most safe and comfortable dwelling may be established here. Before descending, I managed to attach a large pulley to one of the branches, by means of which we could easily raise the timber that would be necessary to form the groundwork of our habitation. While I was so employed, the night fell suddenly, and I had to complete the fixture by the light of the moon. Having called the boys, who were clamoring in all directions, we descended together, and while waiting for supper, which my wife was busily preparing, we collected a quantity of dry branches, twigs, and grass, and heaped them up close to the spot that we had chosen for our temporary encampment. Supper taken and our evening prayer offered, my wife and children were soon resting in their hammocks, which swung from overhanging roots, and I arranged the collected fuel in a circle around the tree and I set fire. Here is a picture of their camp. They have a fire. Looks pretty cozy. Oh, the book was upside down. Okay. Let's see. So, owing to our close proximity to the large forest, I had no doubt that many fierce animals were in the vicinity. I therefore resolved to watch till morning and keep the fire burning as most effective ways of warding off a midnight attack. During the night, I was in a continual state of alarm, and even my wife failed to obtain the sleep she sought. Every moment some new noise startled us. The whole air appeared to fill with dismal sounds. Now it seemed a sullen roar of some irritated animal in the distance. Again, an angry howl that sounded just beside us. Even the very trees added their might to the general confusion and rustling and crackling as if under some heavy weight. Now, for the first time, my wife began to regret our change of locality as she thought the comparative tranquility which reigned around our former habitation. I tried to still her anxiety by telling her that the next night we will be safely lodged. But at the same time, my own heart was filled with fear, and I longed for the light of day. Had to pause for the loud landscaping car to go by. Okay, let's see here. So very slowly did the hours pass, but by degrees the strange sounds decreased. Only now and again a loud roar of some king of the forest, before whom the smaller animals fled in silence, reached our ears. Sleep now began to assert its domination, and I entertained the hope that even yet my wife might be able to secure a few hours of sound repose. I covered her carefully with blankets and also wrapped one round myself, notwithstanding the fire that was still burning brightly. The air was very chill. I then sat down in the grass, and my thoughts reverted longingly to our peaceful home in the lovely Swiss Valley, which in all probability we should never see again. Suddenly, a loud howl of agony in our immediate neighborhood roused me from my revelry and the others from their slumbers. My wife and children started from their hammocks, half asleep, hardly knowing how they had been awakened. Taking up my gun, I advanced beyond the fiery circle, and the boys, encouraged by my example, followed me closely. Before we had gone many steps, we were able to distinguish the cause of our disturbance. Hanging by its tail to the branch of a tree was a mighty serpent. Its body coiled round a large tiger that had been unwary enough to come within its reach, and that had paid for its daring with its life. A bloody contest must have preceded the victory, for on each of the combatants cruel wounds had been inflicted. For a moment we stood motionless, regarding this wonderful spectacle. Then Bill, who had no idea of playing an inactive part in the adventure, rushed boldly to the attack. I called and whistled on him to return, but in his excitement my signs were unheeded. Knowing what his fate was sure to be, I seized the gun which with wise foresight Ernest had brought with him, and aimed at the snake that was just in the act of turning its deadly fangs on its new assailant. I fired, and my ball took dead effect. Gradually, the reptile's hold on its victim relaxed, and its long body hung for a moment trembling in the air. Then its tail unwound itself from the branch, and the monster fell heavily to the ground. On examining it, I found it to be a boa constrictor of more than 18 feet in length. When I explained to the children what a dangerous creature it was, they rejoiced greatly that even one such had been removed from our path. What a pity we can't turn it to any account, said Ernest, who was rapidly being taught by circumstances to utilize everything that came in his way. I didn't say that we could not. I'm happy to tell you that its skin will be most valuable to us for making shoes, of which we shall soon all have the need. Having skinned it, I turned my attention to its prey, which I found to be the most bloodthirsty of all beasts, the royal tiger. It also we robbed of its beautiful coat and left its flesh for the dogs to feast on. By this time, day had dawned. As our breakfast was over, my wife harnessed our beasts of burden with the straps, which under my direction she had made on the previous day, and started with 3 younger boys to the beach for a supply of driftwood. While they were away on this expedition, Fritz and I mounted the tree and set to work to hew down useless branches that may impede our progress. Above those which were to serve as joists for our flooring, we allowed a few to remain at the height of about 8 feet, and on those we intended to hang our hammocks. A little higher up, a few others were so trimmed as to form rafters for the support of the roof, which for the present was to consist of a sailcloth. A space was thus cleared away, wide enough to afford sufficient room for our dwelling. Meantime, a large quantity of timber had been dragged from the shore, and the necessary beams and planks were with little difficulty raised to their places with the help of the pulley. By midday, the floor was laid and surrounded with a solid handrail to prevent accidents. Nothing remained to be done but to put on the roof and raise the hammocks. But this my wife positively forbade us to commence until we had partaken of a light luncheon. A hungry man's work is no work, she said, as she laid before us a large pile of biscuits and some fresh warm milk, which we regaled ourselves to her and our own satisfaction. Then we spread the sailcloth over the high branches, and having drawn it down both sides, nailed it securely to the handrail, so that as the huge trunk of the tree formed a protection at the back, we were thoroughly sheltered on 3 sides. The fourth, which faced the sea, was left open for the present, but I hit upon a plan to closing it in case of need. This was to nail another sailcloth to a roller, so that we could raise or lower it at will, like a blind. When we slung our hammocks onto the branches that had been left for their purpose, our nest, as Jack baptized the aerial structure, was built. We could look forward to a night of undisturbed repose, such as we had not enjoyed since the storm which wrecked our little schooner had arisen. Some portion of the day still before us, we continued our carpenter work, and from the remainder of the wood we constructed a table, a few benches, which we fixed between large roots of the tree. In this outdoor dining room, we looked forward to spending many pleasant hours. We also erected a small stable at the foot of the ladder, which we intended for the accommodation of all of our livestock, except the hens. They had followed their natural instinct and had sought out a peaceful roosting place among the branches of our tree. My wife now prepared a dish for our supper, which consisted of a stew that she had made from the flamingo shot the previous day, and which we unanimously pronounced to be delicious. This repast dispatched, we closed the animals in their shed, and we began our ascent to the nest. Our minds undisturbed by thoughts of danger, we soon fell asleep, and the night passed in sweet tranquility. This is the end of chapter 3, and here is a picture of their new nest. So I'll hold this down. Here's the nest in the tree. There's sailcloth at the top, which prevents the rain from coming in. They have a rail to keep them from falling over. And down near the roots, you can see the ladder that they built and the animals hiding amongst the roots. So their house is built. They finally can sleep easy. So tomorrow we will read, well, maybe tomorrow, the next time we read, I'll read chapter 4, The Return to the Tent House. So I see there may be one person watching. Do you have any questions about the Swiss Family Robinson or any comments? Are you finding this book boring? Is it hard to understand language that's 200 years old? I admit it's a little bit of a challenge to read sometimes because the sentence structure is very proper, I guess. So it's a little hard to read sometimes. So I try not to stumble, but I do sometimes. But anyway, I enjoyed chapter 3. I've always wanted a treehouse. I've never had a treehouse, but I always thought it would be cool. When we were little, we had a playhouse that was kind of off the ground a little bit. Maybe it was off the ground about 4 or 5 feet, and we had a little trap door in the bottom that we could raise and lower. We used to keep my little brother out of our playhouse. I should feel bad about that, but at the time, we just wanted him to stay out of our treehouse and not annoy us. So that's the closest I've ever gotten, a 4-foot off the ground treehouse. Theirs is 40 feet off the ground, a little bit higher up. So hope you guys have a great day and enjoy this beautiful weather outside. And we will read chapter 4 another time. Bye, guys. Love you.